Have you ever noticed how some people seem to treat relationships like prized possessions that become more valuable the moment they might lose them? This fascinating psychological phenomenon reveals how avoidants turn the endowment effect into emotional control, and understanding it might just change everything about how relationships work. The endowment effect, that curious quirk of human psychology where we value things more highly simply because we own them, takes on a rather sinister twist when wielded by those with avoidant attachment styles. Picture this scenario. Someone gives away their most treasured belonging without a second thought, only to desperately want it back the moment it's gone. Now imagine that treasured belonging is actually a person, someone's heart, someone's trust, someone's unwavering devotion. When avoidants master this psychological sleight of hand, they create a puppet show where emotions dance to their rhythm, where love becomes a game of hot and cold that keeps partners spinning in endless circles of hope and despair. The endowment effect whispers to our brains that what we possess holds special value, but avoidants have learned to flip this script in the most cunning way imaginable. They create artificial scarcity in abundance and artificial abundance in scarcity. When love flows freely toward them, they devalue it like yesterday's newspaper. But the moment that same love threatens to walk away, suddenly it transforms into the crown jewels of emotional experience, something they simply cannot bear to lose. This isn't mere coincidence or unfortunate timing. This represents a sophisticated form of emotional control that operates below the radar of conscious awareness, both for the avoidant person and their bewildered partner. The avoidant has learned, perhaps through years of childhood experiences where emotional availability was unpredictable, that the safest way to maintain connection is through strategic distance. They've discovered that people chase what retreats and retreat from what chases. Think about Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl, who masterfully wielded emotional scarcity as her weapon of choice. Or consider Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You, whose obsession only intensified when the object of his affection seemed to slip away. These characters demonstrate how the endowment effect can become twisted into something far more complex and controlling than simple human attachment. But here's where the story becomes truly intriguing, where psychology meets strategy in ways that would make even the most seasoned chess master take notes. What happens when natural human psychology gets hijacked by deep-seated fears of abandonment and intimacy? What emerges when someone learns to weaponize the very mechanisms designed to bond us together? The answers reveal themselves in patterns so predictable they almost seem choreographed, yet so subtle they often go unnoticed until the damage is done. The endowment effect doesn't work alone in this elaborate dance of emotional manipulation. It brings along several cognitive bias companions that amplify its power exponentially. Loss aversion joins the party, making the threat of losing something feel twice as powerful as the joy of gaining it. The sunk cost fallacy whispers sweet lies about investments already made, while intermittent reinforcement schedules create addiction-like patterns of behavior that keep people hooked long past reason's expiration date. These psychological principles didn't evolve to cause suffering, quite the opposite actually. They developed to help humans form strong bonds, make good decisions, and survive in uncertain environments. But when filtered through the lens of avoidant attachment, they become tools for maintaining control while avoiding the vulnerability that true intimacy demands. The result is a relationship dynamic that feels simultaneously intensely connected and desperately lonely, like being hungry at a feast where all the food turns to ash the moment it touches your lips. If you want to better understand someone's attachment style, see the link in the description to one of the most popular books on attachment theory. Now let's explore how this plays out in real life through a story that might feel uncomfortably familiar to many. Meet Sarah, a successful marketing executive who prided herself on being independent and self-sufficient. She met David at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning when he offered to share his umbrella. Their conversation flowed like water, finding its level, natural and effortless, covering everything from favorite books to travel dreams to childhood memories that made them both laugh until their sides hurt. For the first few weeks, Sarah felt genuinely excited about this connection. David's attention felt warm and consistent, like a steady fire on a cold night. He texted her good morning messages, remembered details about her work presentations, and seemed genuinely interested in building something real together. Sarah found herself looking forward to their conversations, even catching herself smiling at random moments throughout the day when she thought about something funny he had said. But then something shifted, subtle at first, like a change in air pressure before a storm. As David's feelings deepened and his availability increased, Sarah began to notice flaws that hadn't bothered her before. His laugh seemed too loud in restaurants. His eagerness to make weekend plans felt suffocating rather than sweet. His genuine compliments started to sound hollow, almost desperate. The very consistency she had initially appreciated now felt predictable and boring. Here's where the story takes its first dark turn, where psychology begins to reveal its more manipulative possibilities. Sarah didn't consciously decide to become distant. Instead, her avoidant attachment system activated like an immune response, treating David's increasing emotional investment as a threat rather than a gift. She began responding to his texts hours later instead of minutes. She started declining invitations or showing up with less enthusiasm than before. She created space where none had existed, not because she needed it, but because something deep inside her felt safer when love had to reach across a distance to find her. David, like most people would, began to chase what was retreating. The endowment effect kicked into high gear as Sarah became less available. Suddenly, her attention felt more valuable, her time more precious, her affection more meaningful precisely because it was becoming scarce. What had felt easy and natural now required effort and strategy, transforming a simple connection into a complex game where the rules kept changing but the prize kept growing more desirable. But here's where the story reveals its most crucial twist, the moment when psychological patterns show their true power. Just as David began to pull back, exhausted from chasing someone who seemed to be running away, Sarah's own endowment effect activated with devastating intensity. The moment she sensed his emotional withdrawal, everything changed. Suddenly, David transformed from someone whose attention felt overwhelming to someone whose attention felt absolutely essential for her emotional survival. The very person she had been pushing away became the most important person in her world the instant he stopped pursuing. His text messages, which she had delayed answering for hours, now demanded immediate responses. His weekend plans, which she had found suffocating, now seemed like the most important events on her calendar. His compliments, which had felt hollow, now carried the weight of absolute truth and necessity. Sarah found herself experiencing emotions she hadn't felt in months, perhaps years. The possibility of losing David created a panic that surprised her with its intensity. She began analyzing every interaction, searching for signs of his continued interest like a detective looking for clues. She started initiating contact more frequently, suggesting activities she had previously declined, showing up with an enthusiasm that felt both genuine and desperately calculated. This wasn't love in its purest form, though it certainly felt overwhelming and all-consuming. This was the endowment effect working in perfect harmony with avoidant attachment patterns, creating an emotional roller coaster that felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Sarah valued David most highly when she felt she might lose him, and least highly when she felt secure in having him. The pattern was as predictable as sunrise, yet as hidden from her conscious awareness as the air she breathed. David, sensing this shift but not understanding its mechanics, found himself caught in a psychological trap that felt both confusing and strangely addictive. When he pursued, Sarah retreated. When he retreated, Sarah pursued. The relationship had become a dance where both partners were always stepping on each other's feet, yet neither could seem to learn the proper rhythm. Like Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris, navigating the complex romantic landscape of Gabriel and Alfie, both Sarah and David were caught in patterns that felt beyond their conscious control, driven by psychological forces they couldn't name or understand. The story reached its climax when David, exhausted and confused, decided to have an honest conversation about their dynamic. But even this moment of potential clarity became another chess move in their unconscious game. Another opportunity for the endowment effect to work its particular magic on hearts that had learned to equate scarcity with value and abundance with threat. Now that we've seen how these patterns play out in real relationships, it's time to explore some practical strategies for recognizing and changing them. The first step involves developing awareness of your own relationship patterns, particularly how your feelings about someone change based on their availability or unavailability. Start paying attention to moments when your interest in someone spikes dramatically. Ask yourself, is this increased interest based on genuine compatibility and connection, or is it triggered by the fear of loss and scarcity? This awareness requires brutal honesty with yourself, the kind that cuts through comfortable self-deceptions like a sharp knife through soft butter. Notice if you find yourself most attracted to people when they're pulling away, or most likely to pull away when someone is moving closer. These patterns often operate below conscious awareness, like background music in a store that influences your mood without your realizing it's even playing. The goal isn't to judge these patterns, but to see them clearly, to understand how they've been running your romantic life from the shadows. The second crucial step involves learning to sit with the discomfort of genuine availability, both your own and others. For avoidant individuals, someone's consistent emotional availability can trigger anxiety that feels almost unbearable, like wearing a sweater that's too tight on a hot day. This discomfort isn't a sign that the person is wrong for you. It's often a sign that your attachment system is encountering something it's not used to handling: steady, reliable, non-threatening love. Practice staying present when someone shows you consistent attention and affection. Instead of automatically looking for flaws or reasons to create distance, try simply experiencing the unfamiliar feeling of being valued without having to earn it through scarcity. This might feel deeply uncomfortable at first, like learning to sleep in a different position after years of habit. The discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're doing something different, something that challenges old patterns that no longer serve your desire for genuine connection. Here's where the work becomes particularly challenging, requiring the kind of emotional courage that would make even Serena van der Woodsen from Gossip Girl pause to consider her next move. You'll need to develop the ability to value what's present rather than chasing what's absent. This involves actively appreciating the people who show up consistently in your life, rather than dismissing them as boring or too available. It means learning to see stability as exciting rather than threatening, consistency as attractive rather than suffocating. One practical exercise involves writing down specific things you appreciate about partners when they're being consistently available before your attachment system has time to devalue them. Keep this list handy for moments when your brain starts whispering that their reliability makes them less interesting or desirable. Read it during those moments when familiarity starts breeding contempt, when your mind begins its predictable search for flaws and exit strategies. The third step requires learning to recognize when others are using scarcity tactics, either consciously or unconsciously, to increase their value in your eyes. This awareness can be particularly challenging because these tactics often work precisely because they trigger deep psychological responses that bypass rational thinking. When someone starts becoming less available just as your interest grows, pause and ask yourself some important questions. Is this person genuinely busy with legitimate life circumstances, or are they creating artificial scarcity? Do their actions match their stated level of interest, or is there a disconnect between their words and behavior? Pay special attention to patterns of hot and cold behavior, where someone alternates between intense connection and puzzling distance without clear external reasons. Like Love Quinn from the Netflix series You, some people have learned that emotional unavailability can be more intoxicating than emotional availability, and they use this knowledge whether consciously or not. Learning to recognize these patterns can help you make more conscious choices about whether you want to participate in dynamics that prioritize drama over genuine connection. But here's where the advice becomes truly transformative, moving beyond simple recognition into active change. The fourth step involves developing your own emotional security to the point where other people's availability or unavailability doesn't dramatically impact your sense of their value or your own self-worth. This represents perhaps the most challenging aspect of this entire process, requiring you to build an internal foundation strong enough to weather the storms of other people's attachment patterns. Start by cultivating relationships and activities that provide consistent emotional nourishment outside of romantic contexts. Build a life so rich and fulfilling that no single person's presence or absence can dramatically alter your emotional landscape. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally distant or protective. It means becoming so secure in your own worth and so rich in meaningful connections that you can afford to be genuinely available to others without losing yourself in the process. Practice making decisions about relationships based on how someone treats you when they feel secure and available, not just during the intense moments of pursuit and retreat. The truest measure of relationship potential lies in the quiet moments of consistency, not in the dramatic peaks and valleys that trigger our psychological biases. Someone who can only value you when they're afraid of losing you hasn't learned how to love. They've simply learned how to manage their anxiety through control. The fifth and perhaps most important step involves developing the capacity for what psychologists call earned security. This means learning to provide for yourself the emotional safety that your childhood attachment experiences may not have provided. It involves becoming the kind of person who can offer and receive love without the elaborate psychological defenses that turn relationships into chess games rather than genuine partnerships. This process requires extraordinary patience with yourself as you unlearn patterns that may have been decades in the making. Every time you catch yourself devaluing someone because they're available or overvaluing someone because they're scarce, you have an opportunity to make a different choice. These moments of choice are where transformation happens, one decision at a time, one relationship at a time, one day at a time. Remember that changing these patterns doesn't mean accepting poor treatment or staying in relationships that don't serve you. It means learning to distinguish between genuine incompatibility and psychological patterns that sabotage good connections. It means developing the wisdom to know the difference between someone who is naturally busy or going through a difficult time and someone who is using emotional unavailability as a control mechanism. Understanding how avoidants turn the endowment effect into emotional control isn't just an academic exercise in psychology. It's a roadmap to freedom from patterns that keep love trapped in cycles of pursuit and retreat. The endowment effect, that fundamental human tendency to value what we own more highly than what we don't, becomes a weapon when wielded by attachment systems that learned to equate vulnerability with danger and consistency with threat. These patterns didn't develop in a vacuum, nor do they persist because people are inherently manipulative or cruel. They represent adaptive strategies that once served important purposes, ways of maintaining connection, while protecting against the kind of emotional injuries that leave lasting scars. But strategies that help children survive emotionally challenging environments often become obstacles to the kind of deep, satisfying love that adults crave and deserve. The cognitive biases we've explored, from loss aversion to intermittent reinforcement, reveal themselves as double-edged swords in the realm of human connection. They can either enhance genuine love by helping us appreciate and fight for valuable relationships, or they can be manipulated to create artificial intensity that substitutes drama for depth, anxiety for excitement, and control for genuine care. Breaking free from these patterns requires more than simple awareness, though awareness certainly provides the foundation. It demands the kind of emotional courage that allows you to value steady love over dramatic love, to choose consistency over intensity, to prefer the quiet strength of genuine partnership over the addictive highs and lows of relationships built on psychological manipulation. The journey toward healthier relationship patterns isn't a smooth upward trajectory, but rather a spiral staircase where you revisit similar challenges at deeper levels of understanding. Each time you choose availability over scarcity, genuine connection over artificial drama, you're not just changing your own life, but contributing to a shift in how love operates in the world around you. For those who recognize themselves in the avoidant patterns we've discussed, remember that your capacity for independence and self-sufficiency represents genuine strengths that can enhance rather than hinder deep relationships when channeled consciously. The goal isn't to become dependent or to lose your sense of self in romantic partnerships, but to learn that true strength includes the ability to be vulnerable, that real independence includes the capacity for interdependence. For those who find themselves caught in cycles of chasing emotionally unavailable people, your capacity for deep feeling and commitment represents beautiful qualities that deserve to be met with equal enthusiasm and availability. The goal isn't to become emotionally distant, but to direct your emotional generosity toward people who can receive it without using it as a source of control or validation. The most profound transformation happens when both patterns meet in the middle, when avoidant individuals learn to stay present with love, and anxious individuals learn to value what's consistently available. This meeting ground represents the possibility of what psychologists call secure attachment, where love flows freely in both directions without the elaborate defenses and strategies that turn relationships into psychological battlegrounds. Take action today by examining your current relationships through this new lens of understanding. Notice where the endowment effect might be operating in your own romantic life. Are you most attracted to people when they're pulling away? Do you find yourself losing interest when someone is consistently available? Are there people in your life whose value you might be underestimating simply because they're reliably present? Start small by expressing appreciation for the people who show up consistently in your life, whether romantic partners, friends, or family members. Practice sitting with the discomfort of being truly seen and loved without having to earn it through drama or scarcity. Challenge yourself to stay present when love feels easy, rather than automatically searching for complications or reasons to create distance. The world needs more people who can love without conditions of scarcity, who can value presence as much as absence, who can find excitement in emotional safety rather than emotional chaos. Your willingness to examine and change these patterns doesn't just transform your own relationships. It contributes to a cultural shift toward healthier ways of connecting and loving. In a world that often confuses intensity with intimacy and drama with depth, your commitment to genuine, available love becomes a radical act of healing that ripples far beyond your own life.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.